Hey, BassGeek here, and are you tired of everybody telling you what should work next month or this month or that month? Well, I'm going to tell you today what did work in 2024, what I caught most of my bass on. That's right, geeks. So I'm going to talk to you about the specific techniques and baits that actually worked this year or last year, depending on when you're seeing this, in 2024. What actually worked for me and how I had to do things to get bites. So the good news is there's no hypotheticals. There's no ifs, ands, it might work this time of month. They work. They catch fish. Let me show you what they are. So the first bait I'm going to talk to you about, there's really two specifically that really shine. There were several that we caught fish on, but these two in particular at two very particular times really paid off for us. And it's one of the first, I would say, 5 baits, may have been one of the first, probably definitely was the first moving bait, horizontal bait that I learned to fish and I catch fish on. And I became confident in. And the way we caught them the best this year was in the spring during post-spawn when the bass were really feeding on shad because the shad spawn was going on. We really had a couple of great days fishing this bait that time of year. The other time was when the bass actually stopped feeding on shad in open water. And we had a couple of really good days throwing a heavier version around a lot of laydowns in the mid to late fall. What is that bait? And it is number 5 on the list, and that is a spinnerbait. The 2 spinnerbaits we really had a good time with this year has got to be the bone color that Booyah released. That bait with a grub on the back of it really shined during the shad spawn. We tried a couple of other baits, and I'm telling you, that color and that little spinnerbait just cracked them. Now, the next one has got to be a Strike King down deep. I loved it during the fall. That bait, because of where I live, and the bluegill that pull up and the panfish that pull up into the laydowns, I can fish extremely deep down to the bottom of those laydowns, and that will get you some really big bites in the fall. So again, number 5, a spinnerbait. So next up has got to be one of the oldest ways to catch bass in bass fishing history. This bait, I've always said, or this rig, I've always said, has probably, throughout the history of artificial lures and rigs, have probably caught more than any other 3 baits or rigs ever created combined. And it starts with a simple setup: a worm, a weight, and a hook. And we know there's a ton of ways to rig that. Some of my favorite worms this year, some of the ones that have really paid off, is simply some of the simple trick worms, some of the straight tail worms, including Cinco style baits. I love the ones from Ramsey, from Bass Munitions. The ones from Bass Munitions don't have a lot of salt, so they'll float up when you're using this or when you're using it on a shaky head. It's not a shaky head. And there's some from a few other companies, but a lot of people make some straight tail worms, so any good ones will work. I'll put a bunch in the description below so that you know what my favorites and which ones exactly worked for me this year. Early spring, when the smallmouth were on the beds, they worked. During the summer, fishing a couple of points, they worked. We fished them a ton of different ways, and that is the good old Texas rig. And that's going to be number 4. Next up is a bait. Really, I could break it down into 2 baits, but I'm actually going to leave it as one group. And these baits pay off in cold weather, they pay off in warm weather. I actually keep at least 1 rod for each style, if not 2 rods rigged up for each style of these baits. So basically what I'm telling you is I can have 4 rods with these baits on them. They work great this time of year, which is in the cold weather. They work great in the middle of the summer. You've seen me talk about them for years. By the way, we've got some really great videos that break down how to use some of them, and I'll put one of those at the end of this so you can really get an in-depth on the hard jerkbaits. So we're going to talk about hard and soft jerkbaits. Which ones really performed for me? It's absolutely got to be two variations this year. Number one, during the warm weather, spring to fall, one of my go-tos is always going to be the Strike King Caffeine Shad in Ghost Shad. That bait, whether I belly weight it or just Texas rig it, is amazing. There's so many different ways to fish it and skip it into cover or into open water. I've got a ton of videos on it. The other I just really discovered this year, and that is a little bigger bait, and I love this one, skipping it and throwing it around cover and working it super erratic, and that's the X-Zone Whiplash Shad. That bait in, let me remember, the name is long, Pro Blue Red Pearl, is an incredible color for the clear water that I fish. And we caught some good ones, especially when it was some overcast days. Now, let's talk about the hard jerkbaits. The hard jerkbait, there is really one that shines. This bait in the clear water lakes that I fish has probably been one of my absolute favorites, my go-to. And I'll fish it a lot of different ways. And that is pure and simple, the Megabass Vision 110+1 Junior in Matte Shad. That bait, whether I weight it to get it down deeper or whether I'm fishing it fast and in a fury, has waylaid largemouth and smallmouth everywhere I've been this year. So number three has to be a jerkbait, whether it's hard or soft. What is number two? What has worked best for me? And I'll bet you geeks won't guess it. I will bet you won't guess it, because I'm betting you'll place it at number one for me. And this year, because of the drought, it did not work as well. The bass just weren't as ready to chase, I don't think. The oxygen levels were low in the water I was fishing because there was less current, and it caused the bass not to be super aggressive like they have in years past. The good news is we've actually added a couple of new players to the game. Normally, from spring through early winter, I love to throw topwater. Topwater is an incredible way to catch bass in clear water, and I think they respond to it even better most of the time than a minnow bait when you're live scoping or when you're not live scoping, because it breaks up the surface of the water. They can't see it real well as long as you're throwing the right colors. The right colors have been almost completely translucent this year. So when we talk about it, the 3 or 4 best topwater baits for me this year have all been walking baits. One, and it's been a star for a long time, is the Pearl Melon One Knocker by Head. Next up, it has been, and this thing really surprised me this year, but a completely translucent Head Spook. That thing was incredible. And again, shout out to my buddy Joey, because that white treble on the back where they were chasing small shad really paid off. And last but not least, the new players being the clear Head and Spook, but a Yozuri 3DB. It's the smaller one, kind of the junior size, but hit destroyed when nothing else would. They wanted zero color, had to be completely broken up on the surface to the point to where they couldn't tell what it was, how big it was, and they just hit it. So topwater walking baits, number 2 with a bullet. Now geeks, I know some of you are gonna hate this, but listen, fishing in my area can be tough. It's extremely highlands, extremely clear. You gotta fish deep. And during the summer, if you wanna catch bass, you better have one of these tied on. In the winter, if you wanna catch bass, you better have one of these tied on. Now we're gonna call it the Demiki rig, but you can call it anything. Hovering, strolling, hover strolling, tight lining, I don't care what you call it. Just understand, it's the ball head jig with a minnow bait on it. Now there were several of those, and it was number 1 because, like I said, these bass, and they wasn't responding to it real well. Normally they respond better to topwater because the bass I fish, they get such a good look. And I threw at schools of 100, 200 bass, they wouldn't even take the jig head minnow. And the reason why is because, again, we are even still, even after the rains of the hurricane, in a drought. So let's talk about the heads first. To me, there were 3 heads that really shine. Number 1 has got to be the Eclipse head by Angler Tungsten. I love the eye on it. So if you've got a bait that doesn't have an eye, I think that eye really paid off in some key situations for us. It also has a screw, which keeps a lot of your baits up much better, so you're not going through a lot of baits. Bait number 2 would have to be the Queen's Tackle head. Now, it's a pretty standard tungsten head, not a lot of frills, but they make it in heavier sizes, 3/4, 1 ounce. And so once we get into the cooler weather, you'll see us use that a lot to get down way deeper to some of these faster moving smallmouth. Last but not least, and I'll tell you what I caught probably some of my biggest bass on, was the Rolling Strolling head. What made this bait so great is the way the line tie turns back toward the hook. That really gave a lot of body roll to the baits we were using. So the baits we used on this, we really had to kind of cycle through. It really depended on, size-wise, depended on size of shad that they were feeding on. It just depended on what they wanted to bite. Some days they would want one color, other days they'd want another. So there's just a few baits that, for whatever reason, we would cycle through, and the one that got bit was the bait of the day. So since really it's called a Demiki rig, let's talk about Demiki right off the bat. And there was 2 colors in the Armor Shad that really stood out, and that was the American Shad, and the other color was the Pearl White, which is actually a little bit translucent. Next up, and this little bait has shined for us, and this is from X-Zone, and it's really a drop shot bait, but the X-Zone Hot Shot minnow really did well. And again, I believe it's the color Pro Blue Red Pearl. That bait really shined for us this year. Seems like when they didn't want to bite anything else, they would bite that bait. We can't leave out the Yum FF Sonar minnow. 2 sizes in that one. Those 2 sizes were the 3 and the 4. The 3 seemed to produce more, but there was 2 colors in it, the Gizzard Shad and the Clear Shad, that seemed to do the most damage for us this year. The 3-inch worked a little bit better. Every once in a while we'd get around some bigger shad and we'd pull out that 4-inch. Those were the 2 colors and sizes that we caught most of them on. But for whatever reason this year, I think one of the baits that really did produce better than probably all of those was the Strike King Baby Z2 in a gray glimmer pearl. For whatever reason, that bait, it's just got a good flat color, and what little bit of flake it's got in it isn't a lot. It just produced seemingly better than any of the rest of them in the clear water. That ghost kind of color by Strike King that they put out, it seems to be a pretty incredible color in the ultra clear water. Those are really the baits that we caught most of our fish on this year. It was a little bit of a tough year, to be honest with you, compared to last year. I mean, we had an incredible season last year. This year's been a little bit tougher, but we ground out some pretty good days along the way. Some baits that we didn't expect to shine, like the spinnerbait earlier in the year. We also learned a ton this year. And that's what happens when you're out on the water. You get to learn, you get to be a better angler, and that's really my goal every single season, is to try, and if you look at the About on the YouTube page, it says it. Come along with me, geeks, as I become the best angler I can be. And I hope I help some of you geeks become better anglers along the way. And I do want to say thank you all. I hope everybody has a happy new year. I hope you had a great Christmas. I want to say thanks, geeks. You've made this season on BassGeek the best one yet. You guys continue to make and change my life for the better. And like I always say, there's nothing special about me other than the fact that you come hang out with me. And I can't tell you thanks enough for allowing us to do this and hang out with you on the weekly basis. Thank you, geeks. It means the world to me and Mike both. Now, if you want to learn more about the difference in body styles and what that means for you when it comes to hard jerk baits, make sure you go check out this video right here. Otherwise, questions, comments in the comments section below. You geeks know I love to talk about fishing with you. Like it if you like it. Don't forget to subscribe. Join that 100% Watch Squad. Ring that bell. Helps us out more than anything just watching the channel. And you geeks rock.